The office air was thick, smelling of old toner and the faint, metallic scent of my father's expensive cologne. I am Berth Alice Miller. At 35 years old, I have spent the better part of a decade acting as the unofficial chief operating officer of Miller & Sons Logistics. It was a role I was born into, but never actually invited to lead. I sat across from my father, Don, watching the clock tick with a rhythmic thud that sounded like a gavel. For years, I had been the one to arrive at 6 a.m. to ensure the fleet was fueled and the drivers were sober. I was the one who memorized the customs codes and the tax loopholes. Yet, as I sat there, I felt like a stranger in a room I had spent my life maintaining. My father didn't look up from his ledger. He reached into his breast pocket and slid a heavy, cream-colored document across the scarred mahogany wood toward me. "I'm stepping down, Berth," he said, his voice as dry as parchment, devoid of any parental warmth. "And I've decided to hand the CEO title to Ethen. You'll stay on as his executive VP, of course. You know the gears better than anyone." "It just makes sense, darling," my mother Dolly added from the leather armchair in the corner. She wore a chillingly sweet, rehearsed smile, the kind she used when she was about to ask for a favor she had no intention of returning. "Ethen has the vision for the future. He understands the modern brand. You're so much better at, well, the tedious things, the payroll, the taxes, the compliance. You can keep the engine running while he builds the Miller legacy into a global name." I looked at the document. My name wasn't on the signature line for the transition. I was listed under support personnel. They weren't asking me to help my brother. They were asking me to be his ghostwriter, his safety net, and his scapegoat all at once. They had simply decided that my decade of expertise, my sleepless nights, and my professional reputation were natural resources for Ethen to mine until there was nothing left but dust. Ethen, my 32-year-old brother, swaggered into the room. He leaned back in his chair with a terrifying kind of entitlement, his expensive watch catching the light. He hadn't managed a single successful project in his life. His last venture was a luxury sock subscription that lost $60,000 in 3 months. Yet, he spoke as if he were the sole architect of the company's success. "I'm thinking of pivoting to AI-driven crypto logistics," Ethen stated, checking his reflection in his phone screen. "I'll need you to reallocate the emergency fleet fund for the initial seed round. We need to be disruptors, Berth. You're too stuck in the old way of doing things, actually owning trucks and paying for gas." The injustice burned in my throat like swallowed salt. My parents had bailed him out of 3 separate bankruptcies, while I had worked 80-hour weeks just to keep the company's primary credit line from collapsing under the weight of Don's outdated management. That night, I sat in my home office with my husband Scott. The weight of their expectation felt like a physical pressure, a tightening band around my ribs. I realized that for years, I had been the silent engine of the Miller family legacy. I was the one who knew which clients were on the verge of leaving due to Don's temper, which drivers were overworked, and exactly how to navigate the Byzantine state regulations that kept us from being shut down. If I stayed, I wasn't just a sister. I was a hostage. I was the one who would be blamed when Ethen's vision inevitably collided with the hard wall of reality. I looked at Scott, who was quietly reviewing our own business plans. "They don't see me as a person," I whispered. "They see me as an appliance, something that just works until it breaks." I didn't argue during the transition dinner. A lifetime of dealing with my mother had taught me that arguing with her was like trying to hold back a mudslide with a plastic spoon. Instead, I smiled, I toasted to Ethen's success, and I went to work on my own terms. Scott and I had been quietly building our own independent consulting firm on the weekends for 2 years. We had a client list that didn't know the Miller name, clients who valued my brain, not my lineage. We had already secured a small, sun-drenched office in a coastal town 4 hours away. I called our lawyer and whispered the words I had been rehearsing for months: trigger the dissolution, sell my personal shares to the minority partners, do it by Friday. For the next 3 weeks, I played the part of the supportive, submissive VP. It was a masterclass in professional camouflage. I helped Ethen onboard, creating elaborate binders and digital folders. However, I didn't include the tribal knowledge, the personal cell phone numbers of the union reps, the specific quirks of the regional port directors, or the manual overrides for the aging server. I watched Ethen ignore every warning I gave him about the company's fragile cash flow. He was too busy ordering custom Italian furniture for his new CEO suite. I wasn't being passive. I was a ghost, fading out of the company before the ink on Ethen's new gold-embossed business cards was even dry. I felt a strange, cold peace every time I deleted a personal file from my workstation. On Ethen's first official Monday as the visionary CEO, I didn't show up. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match. Don and Dolly arrived at the office at 10 a.m. to find my desk completely empty. Not a single paperclip remained. My company laptop was sitting in the middle of the desk, wiped clean, with a single sticky note. The password is in the manual. I sent a single BCC'd email to the company-wide list from my personal account. Effective immediately, I am resigning. All administrative passwords have been reset to the factory defaults found in your physical manuals. All personal guarantees on the company's revolving credit line have been revoked as of midnight. I wish you the best in your new direction. Scott and I drove toward the coast as the sun began to rise. Behind us, in the stale office park, the labor gap I had created became an immediate chasm. Within 48 hours, the payroll system locked everyone out because nobody, not Don, not Ethen, and certainly not the expensive new HR consultant, knew the secondary authentication codes I had managed for years. The drivers began to strike because their fuel cards were declined. The port director stopped taking Ethen's calls because he didn't know the protocol for expedited handling that I had spent years negotiating. Without my silent, daily intervention, the machinery of the Miller legacy began to grind and smoke. The secondary collapse was the one that truly broke them. Don tried to pull a short-term emergency loan to cover the first week of fuel and payroll. He walked into the bank with his usual air of unearned confidence, only to find the door metaphorically slammed in his face. The bank manager, a woman I had played golf with for years, informed him that the company's stellar credit rating was tied to a personal guarantee and a management clause that required my oversight. Without my signature and my proven track record, the bank viewed Miller & Sons as a high-risk gamble. The house of cards was falling, and for the first time in his life, Don's name meant nothing without my labor to back it up. Ethen did exactly what golden children do when the gold runs out and the lights go off. He didn't stay to fight for the legacy. He didn't offer to sell his car or his watch to pay the drivers. Instead, he took the last of the liquid cash in the corporate travel budget, money meant for the fleet's insurance premiums, and bought a one-way ticket to Bali. He posted a photo on Instagram of a sunset and a cocktail, claiming that the negative energy of the family business was stifling his creative growth. He left our parents with a warehouse full of idling trucks, a mountain of lawsuits, and a group of very angry, unpaid employees. The crisis peaked when the Department of Labor initiated a routine audit. In the past, I would have spent a week in the archives, meticulously organizing every permit, every drug test result, and every logbook. I would have made sure the auditors had fresh coffee and perfectly indexed binders. This time, Dolly had to face the auditors herself. She showed up in her Sunday best, expecting to charm her way through the process. She couldn't find the safety records. She didn't know where the insurance binders were kept. She couldn't even explain the basic overtime structure. The company ended up with a 6-figure fine and a suspended operating license simply because my mother didn't think the paperwork mattered. It was in that moment of professional and social ruin that they finally realized I hadn't just been the helper. I had been the fortress. They had spent their lives looking at the walls I built and thinking the safety was a natural phenomenon, rather than something I had constructed brick by brick. They tracked me down to my new coastal office. They arrived without calling, looking weathered and small. Don's suit was wrinkled, and Dolly's hair was uncharacteristically flat. They looked 10 years older, stripped of the bravado that comes with having someone else handle your problems. "Berth, we're your parents. You can't let the legacy die," Don pleaded through the glass door of my new firm. They stood in the hallway, looking at the sleek, modern branding of Berth Alice Consulting. They still expected me to open the door, take the files from their hands, and fix it. They stood there with the same expectation of service they'd always had, as if I were a vending machine that had simply run out of snacks. I looked at them through the glass. I didn't feel the old, familiar flare of anger that used to keep me up at night. I didn't feel the crushing weight of daughterly guilt. I felt a profound, chilling peace. I was no longer a Miller of Miller and Sons. I was just Berth. I opened the door just a crack, not enough to let them in, but enough to let my voice carry. "I didn't kill the legacy, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I just stopped performing the CPR. You wanted Ethen to lead. This is what his leadership looks like. You wanted me to be the tedious one. This is what happens when the tedious person leaves the room." I didn't offer them a seat, and I didn't offer them a loan. I simply handed them the business card of a professional liquidator I had worked with in the past. "He's very good. He'll get you the best price for the trucks." Then, I closed the door and turned the lock. They eventually had to sell the company for pennies on the dollar to a rival firm Don had spent years mocking. My father took a humiliating job as a senior consultant, a title that meant he sat in a cubicle and did the data entry he used to think was beneath him. Dolly had to sell her antique jewelry to pay off the Department of Labor fines. I sat in my new office that evening, watching the sunset over the pier, the orange light reflecting off the water. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethen in Bali, asking for a referral for a job. I didn't get angry. I didn't even reply. I simply swiped left and deleted the contact. For the first time in 35 years, my labor, my mind, and my future belonged entirely to me. I took a deep breath of the salt air and started working on a project for a client who actually knew my name. When does helping your parents cross the line into becoming their unpaid employee? Berth spent a decade managing her family's business and personal lives for free, only to be bypassed for a promotion in favor of her visionary brother. Is walking away and letting the family legacy collapse a betrayal, or is it the only way to finally reclaim your own life? Let's talk about the labor gap in the comments. If you enjoyed Berth's journey from silent servant to independent CEO, don't miss our next deep dive into family dynamics and the power of saying no. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to get every chapter of these masterpiece stories delivered straight to your feed. New stories drop every day. Don't let the legacy leave you behind.